the kingdom of Njoro rose from the red earth like an old memory carved into time itself. Its clay towers glimmered gold under the sun, its broad wooden gates carried the scent of cedar and dust, and every morning the wind carried the songs of market women and flute-playing herders across the valley. People believed Njoro was safe because their rulers were blessed, touched by ancient gifts passed through bloodlines. Some kings could read storms before they came. Others could smell poison in food. A few heard spirits in the night wind. But King Otto was born with a different kind of gift, one the elders had never seen before and did not fully understand. When he was a newborn lying in his mother's arms, an old priest placed a hand on his chest and whispered, almost trembling, "His heart is pure, too pure. The world's lies will slip through him like water." At first, the royal council dismissed the warning. A baby cannot be doomed simply for being good. But as Otto grew, the truth of the prophecy revealed itself in quiet, painful ways. When servants fought and blamed each other falsely, Otto believed every excuse. When friends took advantage of him, he forgave them instantly because he never sensed their deception. And when he became king at 23, the palace learned a simple, dangerous truth. King Otto felt kindness deeply, loyalty fiercely, but he could not sense a lie even if it was shouted into his face. He carried truth like a warm flame in his chest, but that flame blinded him to the shadows dancing around it. Inside the palace, life twisted itself around the king's gentle nature. Ministers flattered him with honeyed tongues, each word soaked in hidden intentions. Nobles exaggerated their achievements, manipulating royal rewards. Merchants bribed officials who whispered false reports to the throne, knowing the king would accept anything said with confidence. Even small lies passed unhindered, guards pretending they stayed awake all night, cooks claiming food shortages to pocket extra coins, advisors faking loyalty with every bow. And through all this, King Otto smiled kindly, thanking them for their honesty, unaware that every room he entered filled with masks. He was not ignorant, he simply could not detect deception. People said he ruled with the softest heart Njoro had ever seen, but also with the weakest shield, for a king who cannot sense danger often becomes its first victim. Otto, however, carried himself with quiet hope. Every morning he walked among his people, helping farmers lift baskets, listening to children sing, visiting old women who blessed him with cracked palms. He believed Njoro was peaceful because people were good. He believed loyalty held the kingdom together. He believed truth was everywhere. But outside the palace walls, among the dust and drums and whispering crowds, the people said something different. "We love our king, but the palace is filled with wolves wearing silk." Everyone in Njoro knew King Otto's gentle heart made him beautiful. They also knew it made him breakable. Somewhere far from the marble courts and gold-painted walls lived a servant who understood the kingdom better than the king himself. Miri was 16, thin as a bamboo reed, with skin dark as river mud and hair braided in the hurried style of someone who rarely slept. He swept halls before sunrise, fed horses before dawn, lit torches at sunset, and cleaned the royal courtyard long after the palace had fallen silent. To everyone else, he was invisible, just another low servant in brown rags, moving through corridors like a shadow nobody cared to look at twice. But inside Miri lived a secret that shaped his entire world. He could hear lies. Not through words, not through cleverness, but through something deeper, stranger, and harder to explain. Whenever someone lied, their voice changed, not in sound, but in vibration. The tone trembled, the breath shifted, the rhythm dipped. It wasn't something he heard exactly, it was something he felt, like a shiver running under the skin or a drumbeat out of place. Truth vibrated smoothly, like a perfectly tuned harp. Lies scraped like broken metal. He discovered this gift as a child, when a neighbor lied about stealing fruit and Miri felt a sharp sting in his ears. Since then, the ability had grown stronger, turning every conversation around him into a mix of melodies and distortions. Miri hid this ability fiercely. He feared people would call him cursed or possessed. He feared being beaten or cast out. And most of all, he feared being used by powerful men who would twist his gift for their own advantage. So he stayed small. Quiet. Unnoticed. Yet every day he listened. He listened to lies sliding through palace halls like snakes. He listened to whispers of bribes, betrayals, and buried secrets. He listened to ministers praising the king falsely, and he listened to the king thanking them with genuine warmth. And sometimes, when the palace was quiet and only torchlight flickered across the stone floors, Miri felt a soft sadness for King Otto, a man too good for the world he ruled. But everything began to shift on one strange, heavy morning when Miri was sweeping the gallery outside the treasury. The air felt unusually thick, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Two ministers walked past him, speaking in low tones. Their words were normal, but the vibrations were wrong, crooked, sharp, bending unpleasantly in Miri's ear. One said, "Tonight, everything changes. Keep your part ready." The other laughed too quickly, too tightly, and replied, "The king will not notice a thing." The vibration jumped like a crack of thunder. Miri froze mid-movement, broom hanging still in his hands. He didn't know what they were planning, but the lie in their voices was heavier than any he had ever felt. It was not a small lie. Not a harmless lie. It was a lie with weight, a lie that dragged danger behind it like a long shadow. As the two men walked away, their footsteps fading down the corridor, Miri felt a sinking in his stomach he couldn't explain. Something terrible was coming. Something bigger than stolen coins or false reports. Something that would shake the palace. That night, as he lit the last torches and walked back toward the servants' quarters, the moon hung over Njoro like an eye watching the earth, and Miri felt vibrations swirling in the air, subtle, uneasy, warning him that trouble was moving quietly through the palace. He didn't know then that before the next sunrise, the kingdom's most treasured relic would vanish, the king's greatest weakness would be tested, and his own hidden gift would drag him into a truth far greater, and far more dangerous, than anything he had ever dared to face. The night did not fall gently over Njoro. It pressed down on the palace like a held breath, heavy and watchful, as if the stone walls themselves sensed that something precious was about to be taken from them. Miri barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, the strange vibrations returned, pulsing faintly through the silence like distant drums warning of war. Long before dawn, he rose from his mat and walked the corridors with a torch, its flame trembling just enough to echo his unease. From behind carved doors, he heard hushed voices, too careful, too rehearsed. Lies moved through the palace that night dressed as whispers. When he passed the inner courtyard, he saw Minister Zaru standing alone beneath the fig tree, his hands folded behind his back, his posture calm, almost reverent. Zaru was a tall man with sharp eyes and a smile that never reached them, a man who spoke slowly, as if measuring every word for weight. To most, he was the backbone of the kingdom, the king's strongest pillar. But as Miri passed, Zaru spoke softly to an unseen guard, praising his loyalty. The words were smooth, respectful, perfect. The vibration was not. It scraped. It twisted. It carried the cold echo of intention hidden beneath politeness. Miri's chest tightened. He had heard many lies before, but this one carried confidence, the kind of confidence that only comes when someone believes the world already belongs to them. At sunrise, the palace gathered in the Hall of Echoes for the monthly honoring of the breathstone. The relic sat at the center of the chamber, resting on a carved pedestal of black wood, glowing faintly with its soft golden blue light. It was said the stone was formed when the first ancestors of Njoro made peace with the land, breathing their vow into the earth itself. As long as the breathstone remained whole, the kingdom believed balance would remain unbroken. King Otto stood before it in simple ceremonial robes, his face calm, his eyes filled with honest reverence. He spoke of unity, of trust, of the duty of those who served the crown. Minister Zaru stood at his side, nodding solemnly, offering praises that flowed beautifully from his tongue. To the hall, Zaru sounded loyal, devoted, unwavering. To Miri, standing at the far edge of the room with the other servants, Zaru's voice hummed wrong, like a drum beaten slightly off rhythm. When Zaru bowed and said, "I would give my life to protect this kingdom," the vibration cracked so sharply it made Miri flinch. The king smiled warmly, placing a hand on Zaru's shoulder, thanking him for his devotion. Miri lowered his eyes, gripping the edge of his tray. He wanted to shout. He wanted to warn someone. But he had lived long enough to know what happened to servants who accused powerful men. Silence, he told himself, was safer. Silence had always kept him alive. The theft happened before the night fully surrendered to morning. A bell rang. Then another. Shouts tore through the corridors like startled birds. The treasury, someone cried. The breath stone is gone. Miri dropped his broom and ran with the others, his heart hammering as guards swarmed the inner chambers. The treasury doors stood open, their locks intact but useless, as if the stone had chosen to walk away on its own. The pedestal was empty. The air felt wrong, thin, hollow, stripped of something vital. King Otto arrived moments later, breathless, disbelief flooding his face as he stared at the vacant space where the kingdom's pride had rested for generations. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then his shoulders sagged, and the hall fell into chaos. Nobles shouted accusations. Guards argued. Servants wept openly. In the noise, Miri heard it clearly, lies rising like smoke. Excuses layered over guilt. Fear masked as outrage. And cutting through it all, Minister Zaru's voice rose firm and commanding. This was no outsider, he declared. Only someone small, someone unnoticed, could move through the palace unseen. His gaze slid slowly, deliberately, toward the servants. Then it stopped on Miri. A boy like that, Zaru said calmly. A low servant with no loyalty. The vibration slammed into Miri like a blow. It wasn't suspicion. It was certainty built on falsehood. Before Miri could react, guards moved toward him, hands gripping spears, faces hardened by obedience. The room buzzed with agreement. A servant was an easy answer, a convenient solution. Miri felt fear claw at his throat, but beneath it, something stronger stirred, an unbearable pressure built from every lie he had swallowed in silence. As they reached for him, Miri looked past the guards, past the shouting nobles, and straight at King Otto. The king's face was pale, confused, wounded by the sudden turn of events. Miri stepped forward before anyone could stop him. His voice shook, but it did not break. It was not me, he said. Minister Zaru is lying. The hall exploded in laughter, outrage, disbelief. A servant accusing the most trusted man in the palace was unthinkable. Zaru laughed too, shaking his head with practiced amusement. This is desperation, he said smoothly. Fear makes children speak nonsense. But as he spoke, King Otto felt something unfamiliar stir inside him. Not anger. Not certainty. Doubt. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there, like a shadow crossing sunlight. He looked at Miri, really looked at him, and noticed something strange. The boy's voice, though frightened, did not tremble with deceit. It carried no hidden rhythm, no urgency to convince. It simply existed, honest and bare. Otto raised a hand, silencing the hall. Enough, he said quietly. The room stilled. No one is punished today. The decision shocked everyone. Zaru's smile tightened, just for a moment, before returning to calm composure. The nobles exchanged uneasy glances. The guards stepped back. King Otto turned to Miri, his eyes searching the boy's face as if seeing him for the first time. You spoke without fear, the king said softly. And that is rare in my palace. He ordered Miri taken not to the cells, but to a private chamber at dusk. As the crowd dispersed, whispers followed the king like restless spirits. Doubt had entered the palace, and it did not belong to anyone else but him. That evening, as the sun bled into the horizon and shadows stretched across the stone floors, King Otto sat alone, replaying the boy's words in his mind. For the first time in his life, he wondered if truth could sound different. For the first time, he wondered if his greatest weakness had finally found its answer. And somewhere in the servants' quarters, Miri waited, heart pounding, knowing that by speaking one truth aloud, he had stepped into a world from which there was no turning back. Miri waited as the palace sank into evening, the kind of quiet that only arrives after fear has exhausted itself. Torches were lit one by one along the corridors, their flames stretching shadows into long, uneasy shapes. When the guards came for him, they did not bind his hands. That alone told him something had changed. He was led through passages he had cleaned 100 times before, yet tonight they felt unfamiliar, heavier, as if every stone were listening. King Otto sat in a small chamber usually reserved for private reflection, his crown set aside, his robe loosened, the stiffness of royalty stripped away. He did not look like a king waiting to judge a servant. He looked like a man waiting for truth. "Tell me," Otto said after a long silence, his voice low and careful, "how you knew." Miri's mouth went dry. This was the moment he had feared all his life. He spoke slowly, choosing words that would not make him sound mad. He described the vibrations, the way truth flowed clean and lies broke apart, how certain voices hurt to hear. He told the king how he had known Zaru was lying not because of suspicion, but because the sound of his voice carried something sharp and false. When Miri finished, he braced himself for disbelief. Instead, King Otto closed his eyes. For the first time, the king felt relief, not the relief of certainty, but the relief of possibility. "All my life," Otto whispered, "I have trusted blindly. And tonight, for the first time, I felt something different." He opened his eyes and met Miri's gaze. "If what you say is true, then you are the one gift this palace was never meant to have." What followed was not a declaration, but an understanding built in silence. King Otto did not announce Miri's role. He did not summon the council or accuse Zaru openly. Instead, he asked Miri to stay. To listen. To watch. To walk beside him when the palace slept. Thus began their quiet partnership, invisible to everyone else. At night, they moved through the corridors like echoes, observing without being seen. King Otto watched how his ministers spoke when they believed themselves safe. Miri listened. He listened to guards swearing loyalty while planning bribes. He listened to scribes altering records with steady hands and lying voices. He listened to Zaru's inner circle, men who laughed too loudly and spoke too confidently, their voices buzzing with distortion. Each night, Miri reported what he heard, not with anger or judgment, but with calm precision. King Otto absorbed it all, his understanding of his own palace slowly unraveling. The kindness that had once blinded him now sharpened into something steadier. He did not harden. He learned. And with every truth Miri revealed, the king felt something inside him mend. For the first time, he was not alone with his weakness. He had someone who could see where he could not. The trail led them downward. It began with a servant's lie about cleaning schedules, then a guard's false claim about missing keys, then a mason's nervous denial about recent repairs near the treasury wall. Miri heard something hollow beneath their words, an echo that did not belong above ground. Beneath the palace, something had been carved open. Old records confirmed it, plans from a forgotten era, tunnels sealed generations ago after a failed coup. Zaru had reopened them quietly, piece by piece, using trusted men and paid silence. One night, guided by Miri's sense of sound rather than sight, they found the hidden entrance behind a storage wall. The air that rose from it was cold and stale, carrying the weight of secrecy. Torches revealed carvings etched by hands long dead, warnings and symbols of ambition carved into stone. King Otto hesitated at the threshold, feeling the pull of everything he had believed breaking apart. Miri stepped forward first. "The lies are louder down there," he said. "But so is the truth." Together, they descended. The tunnel stretched deeper than either of them expected, twisting beneath the palace like a buried spine. Their footsteps echoed, mixing with distant voices carried through the stone. Miri's head throbbed as vibrations bounced off the walls, fear, greed, anticipation. They followed the sound of falsehood like a trail of broken glass until they reached a chamber lit by an unnatural glow. There, surrounded by crates and armed men, stood Minister Zaru. In his hands, the breath stone pulsed weakly, its light dimmer than it had been in the Hall of Echoes. Zaru turned slowly, his expression unreadable at first, then almost amused. "So," he said, "the king finally learned to doubt." His voice was calm, confident, but Miri felt the vibration surge violently, thick with pride and resentment. Zaru spoke of destiny, of strength, of how a kingdom needed a ruler who could lie convincingly and strike without remorse. "You were never meant to rule," he told Otto, his words cutting deep. "You feel too much. You trust too easily." King Otto listened, his heart breaking not from insult, but from recognition. He had loved this man like a brother. When Zaru's guards moved, everything shattered into motion. Steel flashed. Shouts filled the chamber. Miri acted on instinct, pulling the king back just as a blade swung through the space where he had stood. He could feel the lies before they became movements, hear the intention before the strike. In the struggle, someone collided with Zaru. The breath stone slipped from his grasp and hit the stone floor with a sound that cracked the air itself. Light burst outward, blinding and alive, as the stone fractured into glowing fragments that rose like dust caught in sunlight. The chamber fell silent. Zaru stared in horror. His power, his leverage, gone in an instant. Guards flooded the tunnel moments later, drawn by the light and noise. Zaru tried to speak, tried to spin another lie, but Miri stepped forward, his presence alone enough to stop the words in the minister's throat. King Otto looked at the glowing dust drifting upward, then at Miri. In that moment, he understood something that would change Njoro forever. Truth did not need to shine. It needed to be heard. Truth did not need to shine. It needed to be heard. The glowing dust of the shattered breath stone drifted slowly toward the ceiling of the hidden chamber, clinging to the air like the last breath of something ancient and alive. For a moment, no one moved. The guards who had rushed in stood frozen, unsure whether they had just witnessed a miracle or a curse. Minister Zaru stared at the empty space where the stone had been, his face stripped bare of calculation for the first time. The confidence that had once wrapped him like armor fell away, replaced by something raw and ugly. "You've ruined everything," he hissed, his voice trembling now, fractured beyond repair. Miri felt the vibration collapse into itself, the sound of a man whose lies had finally lost their shape. King Otto stepped forward, his footsteps steady despite the storm raging inside his chest. He looked at Zaru not with anger, but with a sorrow so deep it seemed heavier than rage could ever be. "I trusted you," the king said quietly. "Not because you were powerful, but because I believed you were true." Zaru laughed bitterly, shaking his head. "Truth is a luxury," he snapped. "Power is what keeps a kingdom alive." His words echoed hollowly through the chamber, stripped of persuasion, stripped of grace. The guards moved to restrain him, but Zaru lunged forward suddenly, desperation giving him reckless strength. In that instant, Miri felt it before it happened, a sharp, violent distortion slicing through the air. He shoved the king aside just as Zaru's blade flashed, missing Otto by inches. The sound of metal clattering against stone rang out, followed by the unmistakable noise of a man losing everything he believed he deserved. Zaru fought like someone who knew there was no escape left, his movements wild, driven not by strategy but by wounded pride. The guards closed in, but he lashed out, shouting accusations, curses, half-formed lies that barely held together. Each word cracked against Miri's senses, collapsing under its own weight. "You made me do this," Zaru shouted at the king, his voice breaking apart completely now. "Your weakness forced my hand." King Otto did not answer. He stood watching as the man he once relied upon unraveled before him, feeling a strange clarity settle over his heart. For the first time, he could see betrayal without confusion, see ambition without its polished mask. When the guards finally subdued Zaru, pinning him to the cold stone floor, the chamber exhaled as if releasing a long-held breath. The glowing dust from the breath stone began to fade, dissolving into the cracks of the earth, leaving behind nothing but silence and loss. King Otto knelt, not to retrieve what was gone, but to steady himself. He realized then that the stone had never been the true heart of Njoro. It had been a symbol, nothing more. The real danger had lived in the palace all along, growing quietly behind smiles and vows. And the real protection had been standing beside him, unseen, unheard, until now. By dawn, the entire kingdom knew. Drums called the people to the great square as Zaru was led out in chains, his head bowed, his voice finally empty of lies because there was nothing left to protect. King Otto stood before the gathered council, the nobles, the guards, and the citizens of Njoro, his face calm, his posture unshaken. He spoke not of punishment first, but of truth. He spoke of how easily goodness can be used against itself, how trust without protection becomes an open door. He admitted his weakness openly, without shame, and the crowd fell silent, stunned by a king who dared to confess rather than pretend. When Zaru was sentenced to lifelong imprisonment, there was no triumph in the king's voice, only finality. As the former minister was taken away, he looked once more at Miri, his eyes searching for something, fear, hatred, regret, but finding none. Miri did not glare. He did not celebrate. He simply stood, breathing evenly, listening to the steady rhythm of truth settling back into place. King Otto turned to him then, in front of everyone, and placed a hand over his heart. "This kingdom survived tonight not because of stone or steel," he said, his voice carrying across the square, "but because one quiet voice chose truth over silence." The crowd murmured, understanding dawning slowly. And in that moment, as the sun rose over Njoro and lit the palace walls once more, the era of blind trust ended, not with bitterness, but with wisdom earned at a terrible cost. The era of blind trust ended, not with bitterness, but with wisdom earned at a terrible cost. In the days that followed, the palace of Njoro felt strangely lighter, as if something poisonous had finally been drawn out of its walls. Doors once closed were opened. Records once hidden were laid bare. King Otto did not rush to replace what had been broken. He moved slowly, deliberately, listening more than he spoke. The absence of the breathstone left an ache in the kingdom, but it also left space for something more honest to take root. Each morning, Otto met with his council, and for the first time, he did not sit alone beneath their words. Miri stood a few steps behind him, silent, unassuming, his presence barely noticeable to those who did not understand what it meant. Yet every sentence spoken in that chamber passed through him first, measured not by cleverness, but by sound, by rhythm, by the quiet certainty of truth or the unmistakable fracture of a lie. Ministers who had grown comfortable with deception found themselves stumbling, their voices betraying them before their words could. Some resigned quietly. Others were removed without spectacle. There were no public shames, no dramatic executions, only a steady cleansing that felt almost gentle. King Otto addressed the people often during this time, not from a throne, but from the steps of the palace, standing at their level. He spoke openly of his weakness, of how his heart had always believed before it questioned. He did not apologize for his kindness. Instead, he reframed it. A pure heart, he told them, is not a flaw. It is a responsibility. And responsibility must be protected. The people listened, not because he was powerful, but because he was honest. In that honesty, they found a new kind of loyalty, one rooted not in fear, but in shared truth. On the 7th day after Zaru's fall, King Otto called a gathering unlike any Njoro had ever seen. The great square filled at dawn, not with celebration, but with quiet anticipation. Elders stood beside farmers. Guards stood beside children. When Otto stepped forward, Miri followed, still dressed in simple clothes, his eyes lowered as if the ground itself were more important than the moment unfolding around him. The king raised his hand, and the murmuring ceased. "Our kingdom once believed truth lived in stone," Otto said, his voice steady. "But stone can be broken. Truth cannot." He turned then, not toward the nobles, but toward Miri. "This boy heard what I could not," he continued. "He carried truth alone while the rest of us hid behind comfort and silence." Miri felt the weight of 1,000 eyes on him, felt the vibrations ripple outward, curiosity, awe, uncertainty, but no deceit. King Otto knelt. The sound of a king's knees touching the earth sent a shock through the crowd. "I am not complete without him," Otto said simply. "And no ruler should be." He rose and declared the creation of a new role, one that had never existed in Njoro's long history. The royal truth keeper. Not a judge. Not an executioner. But a guardian. One whose duty was not to speak loudly, but to listen deeply. When Otto placed the symbol of the office, a simple cord woven with threads of white and blue, into Miri's hands, the boy's breath caught. He did not smile. He did not bow dramatically. He only closed his fingers around it and nodded, feeling the vibration of truth settle like a steady drumbeat in his chest. The crowd did not cheer at first. They were too busy understanding. Then, slowly, sound rose, not thunderous applause, but something warmer, steadier. Acceptance. Years later, when travelers spoke of Njoro, they did not speak of glowing stones or ancient relics. They spoke of a kingdom where words mattered. Where promises were made carefully. Where a king ruled with a heart still soft, but no longer unguarded. King Otto aged into wisdom, never losing his kindness, never pretending to hear what he could not. Miri remained at his side, quieter than ever, his gift unchanged, his purpose clear. He did not interfere with every lie, only the ones that threatened the soul of the kingdom. Together, they ruled not through fear or illusion, but through balance. On some nights, when the palace slept and the wind carried distant songs across the valley, King Otto would stand on the balcony and listen to the silence. For the first time, he once said softly, "I can finally hear the truth." Miri did not answer. He did not need to. The truth was already there, in the steady rhythm of the kingdom's breath, in the absence of distortion, in a ruler who understood that strength was not the ability to dominate, but the courage to admit where one is incomplete. And so Njoro endured, not as a perfect kingdom, but as an honest one. And in the end, that was enough.